The Galactic Senate chamber was vast, a circular hall filled with the most powerful beings in the universe. Senators from 100 different species sat in their floating seats, looking down at the speaker's platform in the center. The air buzzed with the hum of technology, and the walls shimmered with holographic displays of different planets. Senator Vorkal, a tall, reptilian creature with golden scales, cleared his throat. His sharp teeth gleamed as he smirked. "We are here to discuss an amusing matter," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. The other senators chuckled. "Ah, yes," said Senator Parath, a towering insectoid with 6 glowing eyes. "The humans, or rather, what is left of them." Laughter spread through the hall. The Galactic Senate had not thought about Earth in years. To them, humanity was nothing more than a failed species, a primitive race that had challenged the wrong enemies. "The humans are extinct," said a senator with blue, translucent skin. "Why are we even discussing them?" Before anyone could answer, the great doors of the chamber burst open. A messenger rushed in, his silver robes fluttering behind him. His 4 arms trembled as he held a data pad, his breathing heavy. "Honorable senators, there is an urgent matter." His voice cracked with fear. Senator Vorkal frowned. What could possibly be urgent enough to interrupt this session? The messenger gulped. "A fleet? No, an entire planetary system has gone silent." The hall, once filled with amusement, fell into an uneasy silence. Senator Parath clicked his mandibles. "Which system?" "The Varnus sector. 5 planets, 3 military outposts. All communications have stopped." The messenger's hands shook as he handed over the datapad. "Scouts sent to investigate. Never returned." A murmur spread across the chamber. Senator Vorkal snatched the datapad and studied the reports. "This is ridiculous. The Varnus sector is one of the most secure regions in the galaxy. Nothing could destroy it so easily." The messenger's voice trembled. "It wasn't destroyed. It was just erased." The word sent a chill through the room. Senator Parath leaned forward. "Do we know who is responsible?" The messenger hesitated, then pressed a button on his device. A holographic transmission appeared in the center of the room. The image was static at first, then a voice echoed through the chamber. It was cold, human, and emotionless. "You thought we were gone." The room tensed. Human. It was a human voice. "You thought we were weak." The transmission flickered, and for a brief second, a shadowed figure appeared, a humanoid wearing black armor, its face hidden. "Now, it's your turn to disappear." The message ended abruptly. The Senate chamber was silent. No one spoke. No one laughed. Senator Vorkal's claws tightened around his armrest. "This is a joke," he growled. "Humanity is extinct. We destroyed Earth. We wiped out their colonies. This is impossible." But deep down, he wasn't so sure anymore. Senator Parath exhaled slowly. "If it truly is humanity, then we made a mistake." A new voice spoke up from the back of the chamber, one that had been silent until now. It belonged to Grand Chancellor Xyphos, the leader of the Senate. His piercing silver eyes studied the hologram, his face unreadable. "We didn't destroy humanity," he said, his voice calm but filled with unease. The senators turned to him in confusion. "They destroyed themselves," Xyphos continued, "so they could become something far more dangerous." The chamber erupted into chaos. Senators shouted over one another, demanding answers. Who were these humans? Where had they been hiding? How could they erase entire planets without a trace? No one had answers. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Senate felt fear. And somewhere, in the dark corners of space, the ghosts of humanity were watching. The Galactic Senate chamber remained in chaos. The news of the Varnus sector's complete erasure had shattered the senators' confidence. Panic spread among them, voices rising as they argued, trying to make sense of the impossible. Grand Chancellor Xyphos remained silent, his sharp silver eyes fixed on the last flickering image of the human transmission. The words still echoed in his mind. "Now, it's your turn to disappear." He had ruled the Senate for centuries, had seen the rise and fall of empires, had witnessed the destruction of countless civilizations, but never had he seen an enemy return from extinction. Senator Vorkal slammed his clawed fist against the armrest of his floating seat. "We need to send a fleet. Whatever threat remains of humanity must be crushed before it spreads." Parath, the insectoid senator, twitched his antennae in disagreement. "Do not be foolish. If they can erase planets without a trace, what makes you think a fleet would survive?" Vorkal growled, his golden scales darkening. "You speak as if we should fear them. They are nothing but a broken species, hiding in the shadows like cowards." A new voice interrupted. It was General Krenzor, the supreme commander of the Galactic Armada. His deep, rumbling tone silenced the room. "You are wrong." Every senator turned toward the massive, battle-scarred warrior. Krenzor was a legend, a veteran of the war against humanity centuries ago. His body bore the marks of that conflict, his left arm replaced by an advanced cybernetic limb, his armor dented from battles long past. "They are not hiding," Krenzor said grimly. "They are hunting." A holographic display activated in the center of the chamber, showing the last known locations of the missing fleets. Every outpost, colony, and military base that had gone silent in the past few months appeared on the map. At first, the pattern seemed random, but as the senators watched, a dark realization spread through them. The locations formed a path, a deliberate, precise movement through the stars, a calculated strategy. Krenzor zoomed in on the map. "They are cutting off our supply routes, weakening our defenses, and most importantly," he pressed another button, and the path suddenly led to a single destination, the heart of the Galactic Empire, the capital planet. Shock rippled through the Senate. It was a slow invasion, a quiet war, and no one had realized it until now. Senator Parath's mandibles clicked nervously. How could this happen? Our intelligence networks should have detected human activity years ago. Krenzor's mechanical arm tightened into a fist. "Because the humans we fought in the past no longer exist." A cold silence settled over the chamber. "They were always a reckless species," Vorkal sneered. "Unorganized, weak. They fought with passion instead of logic, and it was their downfall." Krenzor shook his head. That was their weakness before. But now, they have changed. He turned to the senators, his expression grim. "Tell me, how does a species survive when their planet is destroyed? When their people are hunted to near extinction? When they have nowhere to run?" No one answered. "They adapt," Krenzor said. "They evolve, and they become something new." A heavy pause. Parath's eyes glowed dimly. "What are you suggesting?" Krenzor exhaled slowly. "I'm saying that humanity is no longer just human." The words sent a ripple of unease through the chamber. The very idea was terrifying. For centuries, the Senate had assumed that humanity was dead, that their weakness had led to their inevitable end. But what if their desperation had led them down a different path? What if the last survivors of Earth had not just survived, but had transformed into something even more dangerous? The hologram flickered again. A new transmission had arrived. The senators stiffened as a familiar voice echoed through the hall. "You destroyed our world." A shadowed figure appeared again, standing in the darkness. "You wiped out our colonies." The figure took a step forward. This time, something changed. The senators gasped as they noticed the glowing mechanical veins running through the humanoid's body. "But we are still here." The figure lifted its head, revealing a pair of piercing, artificial eyes, glowing with an eerie light. "And now, it's our turn." The transmission cut out. No one spoke. For the first time in history, the Galactic Senate felt true fear. The Galactic Senate chamber was no longer filled with shouting voices. Instead, there was a suffocating silence. The last transmission had left even the most arrogant senators in stunned disbelief. Grand Chancellor Xyphos sat motionless, his golden robes dim under the pale glow of the holographic projector. His long, clawed fingers tapped against the armrest of his floating throne, the only sound in the chamber. Humanity was alive, but they were no longer the species the galaxy had once known. General Krenzer finally broke the silence. His cybernetic eye flickered as he analyzed the remnants of the human transmission. "This is no longer just a battle for territory," he muttered. "This is a war of vengeance." Senator Vorkel, still fuming, slammed a fist against his chair. "Enough with the theatrics. They are one species. We are an empire of thousands. Deploy the full force of the Galactic Armada and end this madness." Parath, the insectoid senator, twitched uneasily. "Are you certain that is wise? We still know nothing of what they have become." Vorkel bared his fangs in a smirk. "Does it matter? They are outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1. Krenzor turned to him, his expression unreadable. "And yet they have erased entire fleets without a trace." That single sentence made Vorkel hesitate. He opened his mouth to argue, but for once, no words came. The silence did not last long. A new alert blared through the Senate chamber. The distress signal coming from the heart of the Empire. The senators straightened, their eyes widening. Xyphos waved his hand, and a holographic display shifted. The image of a grand battle cruiser appeared, its hull bearing the crest of the Empire's high command. It was the Indomitable, one of the largest and most powerful warships ever built. It was burning. Sparks flew from shattered hull plating. Fires raged across the decks. Debris floated in the void, the remains of what had once been an invincible vessel. The transmission flickered, and the face of Admiral Therax appeared. His reptilian features were covered in blood, his uniform scorched. The background was pure chaos, alarms blaring, officers shouting, smoke filling the air. "This is Admiral Therax of the Indomitable." His voice was ragged, desperate. "We have been ambushed. We." A loud explosion cut him off. The screen flickered violently, the transmission struggling to remain stable. Then, a new figure appeared behind the Admiral. A human. The senators froze. It was unlike any human they had ever seen. Its body was wrapped in dark, metallic armor, sleek yet terrifying. Blue energy veins pulsed beneath its synthetic skin. Its eyes were hollow, glowing with an unnatural light, devoid of emotion, yet filled with cold intelligence. Admiral Therax turned, his face contorted in horror. "No, stay back." The human figure did not speak. It simply raised its hand, and the Admiral screamed. A pulse of pure energy erupted from the human's palm, engulfing Therax in blue fire. His body disintegrated instantly, leaving behind only a silhouette of ash before the flames devoured it entirely. The transmission cut to static. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was finally broken by Xyphos, his voice barely a whisper. "What? What are they?" Krenzor exhaled heavily. His cybernetic arm tensed. "They are not human anymore." Vorkel, for the first time, looked shaken. This is not possible. They do not have the technology for this." Parath clicked his mandibles in agreement. They were a primitive species before their fall. How could they have advanced beyond us? Xyphos's eyes darkened. They had nothing to lose. That makes them more dangerous than any empire. Another alarm blared. This time, it was not a distress signal. It was an invasion alert. The senators stiffened as the holographic map of the empire updated in real time. Dozens of red markers appeared near the outer rim. Then hundreds. Then thousands. The human counterattack had begun. Krenzor clenched his fist. They'd been waiting for this. Xyphos stood, his golden robes billowing as he turned toward his advisors. His voice was steady, but the weight of impending doom hung over his words. "Summon every fleet, every soldier, every weapon we have." His eyes burned with something close to fear. "We are no longer hunting a lost species," he said. We are facing something far worse. The war that had once destroyed humanity had just become the war that might destroy the galaxy. The vastness of space was silent. It always had been. But tonight, that silence felt unnatural, a void before the storm. The Galactic Empire had ruled for millennia, spreading its influence across thousands of star systems, enforcing its will with a military unmatched in strength. And yet, it had never known fear. Until now. The fleets of the Empire had mobilized in record time. Thousands of warships, from the smallest frigates to massive dreadnoughts, assembled in formation. The High Command had stationed them across key systems, preparing to crush the rebellion before it could take root. But deep down, the Senate knew. This was not a rebellion. This was a reckoning. Admiral Vokrin stood on the bridge of the Imperator, the largest warship in the fleet. It was more than a ship. It was a fortress, a symbol of the Empire's absolute authority. Its weapons had reduced entire planets to nothing but dust. Yet tonight, the Admiral's claws drummed anxiously against the console, because the enemy still had not revealed itself. "They are taunting us," Vokrin growled, his cybernetic eye scanning the void ahead. "They'd want us to wait, to doubt." His second-in-command, Captain Sailor, shifted uneasily. "We outnumber them 1,000 to 1. We should be the ones striking first." "And yet," Vokrin muttered, "we are the ones who feel like prey." A sudden beeping on the sensor grid shattered the uneasy silence. "Admiral," one of the officers shouted. "Unidentified ships detected, approaching fast." The main screen flared to life, displaying blurry, shifting figures moving through the darkness. The readings made no sense. One moment, they were tiny specks, barely larger than fighter craft. The next, they were immense, rivaling the size of battle cruisers. "They're scrambling our sensors," Sailor said through clenched teeth. "It's impossible to get an exact count." Vokrin narrowed his eyes. "That's because they don't want us to know what we're dealing with." A moment later, the first enemy ships emerged from the darkness. The bridge fell deathly silent. They were unlike anything the Empire had ever seen. Sleek, black, almost alive. Their hulls shifted and pulsed with eerie blue energy veins. There were no visible weapons, no insignias, no signs of an open cockpit. They moved too smoothly, almost as if they were thinking, adapting in real time. Then, in perfect unison, the ships vanished. A gasp rippled through the bridge. Where did they? A blinding explosion erupted outside the viewport. One of the Empire's battlecruisers split in half, its armor sheared apart, as if torn by an invisible force. A moment later, more ships detonated, fire and debris scattering into the void. "They're inside our formation," Sailor shouted. "How?" There had been no warning, no visible approach. The fleet scrambled into action. Beams of energy streaked through space, lighting up the battlefield. The Empire's firepower could reduce entire continents to ash. But no matter how many shots they fired, the enemy ships were simply gone before the blasts could reach them. "They're moving faster than light," an officer whispered in horror. "They're phasing in and out of real space." Vokrin gritted his teeth. This wasn't a battle. This was a slaughter. "Switch to manual targeting," he roared. "Use predictive fire. Cut them off before they phase again." The gunners adjusted, and for a moment, it worked. A few lucky shots struck their targets, causing small explosions to ripple across the enemy ships. But then something far worse happened. The damaged ships repaired themselves. The blue veins pulsed brighter, the wreckage stitching itself back together as if time were rewinding. The Empire's strongest weapons were useless. One of the alien ships suddenly turned, barreling straight toward the Imperator. Brace for impact. But instead of crashing, it phased through the hull. An instant later, the lights flickered across the ship. Consoles shut down. Systems failed. The crew screamed as the temperature plunged, not just from a loss of power, but from something unnatural. And then they heard it. A whisper. A voice that was not mechanical, nor truly alive. You took everything from us. Vokrin's blood ran cold. For the first time in his career, the legendary admiral of the Empire felt fear. This was no ordinary battle. This was no mere war. This was humanity's revenge. Darkness crept through the Imperator's halls like a living entity. The once mighty warship, the pride of the Galactic Empire, now shuddered under an unseen force. Alarms screamed through the corridors, but the crew could barely move. The air had turned heavy, as if an invisible weight pressed down on their bodies. The temperature continued to plummet, frost creeping across the metal walls, forming eerie patterns that pulsed with an unnatural glow. Admiral Vokrin gripped the edge of the command console, his cybernetic eye flickering as it struggled to process what was happening. "This isn't just an attack," he muttered under his breath. "This is something else." A voice whispered through the ship's comms. It wasn't static, nor the panicked cries of the crew. It was something far worse, a voice that carried centuries of hatred, suffering, and vengeance. "You burned our world." The whisper slithered into every ear, into every console, every machine. "You called us lesser. You took our sun. You thought we would fade." Vokrin's claws clenched into fists. Find the source of that transmission. An officer frantically tapped at his controls, his face pale. "Sir, there is no source. The message isn't coming from outside." He hesitated, his throat dry. "It's coming from inside the ship." The whisper turned into a low, rumbling growl. "You were wrong." The ship lurched violently, sending crew members crashing into the walls. The bridge lights flickered before shutting off completely, plunging the room into absolute darkness. Then, a scream. Not from the comms, not from the battle outside, but from right there on the bridge. Vokrin turned sharply. Captain Sealer, his most trusted officer, was floating, his feet no longer touching the ground. His body convulsed as if some unseen force was holding him in midair, twisting his limbs. His mouth was open in a silent, agonized scream. Then, he vanished. No explosion, no energy blast, just gone. A moment later, another scream. Then another. One by one, crew members disappeared, yanked into the void as if the ship itself had betrayed them. "Shields up. Defensive protocols now." Vokrin roared, his voice filled with something he hadn't felt in centuries. Pure terror. But there were no shields, no defenses. There was only the whisper. "You took our home." The flickering emergency lights cast long shadows over the bridge, and then the shadows moved. Vokrin's remaining officers froze. The shadows, once just empty darkness, now stretched across the floor and walls like living tendrils. They slithered toward the crew with an unnatural fluidity, pulling themselves forward like hunting beasts. One of the officers tried to run, but before he could take 2 steps, a shadow shot upward, wrapping around his throat. His body went rigid, his eyes wide with silent horror as he was pulled backward into the darkness. Vokrin could do nothing but watch as more of his crew were dragged away, one by one, their screams lost to the abyss. The whisper deepened into a chorus of voices, overlapping, each one carrying the weight of an entire species that had been erased. "You thought we died in silence. You thought the stars would forget us. You thought extinction was the end." A cold realization slammed into Vokrin's mind like a collapsing star. This wasn't just humanity's revenge. This was humanity's return. And they weren't flesh and blood anymore. They were something else. Something beyond death. Something born from hatred, war, and the void itself. The shadows rushed forward, swallowing the bridge. The last thing Vokrin saw before the darkness consumed him was the hollow glow of 2 human eyes staring back at him from the abyss. Then there was nothing. Only silence. And the whisper. The Galactic Senate chamber was in chaos. Representatives from thousands of worlds filled the colossal hall, their holographic projections flickering with interference. Fear radiated from every being present: senators, admirals, warlords, and rulers, all gathered in desperate confusion. At the center of it all, Chancellor Virex slammed his staff against the marble floor, his 3 golden eyes burning with frustration. "Silence," he roared. "Order must be restored. We will not descend into." The chamber shook. A low, resonant rumble echoed through the Senate hall, not from outside, but from everywhere at once. The massive holographic display at the center of the room, which once streamed battle footage from the front lines, glitched violently. Then the images returned, and every senator froze. The Imperator, the pride of the Galactic Fleet, the most powerful warship ever built, was adrift in space. Its colossal frame, once gleaming with imperial might, was now dark, lifeless, and wrong. The once pristine hull was twisted and warped, as if the metal had been decayed from within. "No life signs," one of the analysts muttered in horror. "It's empty." The image zoomed in, revealing the shattered bridge of the Imperator. And there, standing at the very front, surrounded by the shadows of his vanished crew, was Admiral Volkrin, or what was left of him. His body stood motionless, his once regal uniform in tatters. His cybernetic eye flickered weakly, but his face was blank, devoid of any expression. But his mouth was moving. A voice hissed through the chamber speakers. "They are here." A senator from the Solari Dominion trembled. Who is here?" Volkrin's body twitched unnaturally, and then his voice deepened, no longer his own, but layered with countless voices. "We are." The chamber's lights flickered, and for the first time in galactic history, the immortal rulers of the Empire felt fear. The battle footage shifted again. Other ships, hundreds of them, floated lifelessly, their crews missing, erased. Entire fleets had been silenced without a single shot fired. "This," Chancellor Virex's voice wavered, "this is impossible." But then the footage changed one last time. A new image appeared. Something was coming. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of dark ships were moving through space, advancing toward the galactic core at terrifying speed. These were not the ships of any known civilization. They were black as the void, with no visible engines, no heat signatures, no energy readings, just moving like phantoms. And yet, at the heart of their formation, one massive structure loomed, an impossibly vast vessel, its silhouette casting a shadow even against the darkness of space. It was a city, a fortress, a graveyard, all fused into one. And as the Senate watched, symbols appeared on its surface, glowing in a language that had not been seen for centuries. One word: Earth. The realization hit the chamber like a collapsing star. Humanity was not just back. They had become something else. Something unstoppable. Something unkillable. A hushed voice whispered in the chamber. They are supposed to be extinct." The lights flickered again. And for the first time in recorded history, the rulers of the Galactic Empire knew what it meant to be prey. A deep, suffocating silence filled the Galactic Senate chamber. The senators, once proud, once arrogant, now sat in rigid fear, their bioluminescent skin dimming, their tendrils curling in distress, their cybernetic limbs twitching. They had ruled the stars for millennia. And yet before them, on the massive holographic display, lay proof of their failure. The Imperator, their grandest warship, was reduced to a drifting tomb. Entire fleets had been silenced without a single trace of battle. And now, an unkillable enemy had returned from the abyss of extinction. Earth. Humanity. The ghosts they had erased were back, and they were coming. Chancellor Virex's 3 golden eyes flickered with panic. His voice, once booming with authority, now shook with dread. This is a deception," he stammered. "A trick of warfare. No race simply disappears for centuries and—" "Chancellor." The cold voice came from General Threx, Supreme Commander of the Galactic Defense Forces, His scaled hands were clenched into fists, his armor adorned with battle scars from hundreds of campaigns. He did not believe in myths. He did not believe in fear. And yet, his claws trembled as he pointed toward the holographic display. This is no deception. The Senate turned their gaze to the incoming fleet, the dark phantoms that moved through space like silent predators. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. The black vessels bore no insignia, no markings of allegiance. Their hulls absorbed the light, making them seem like shadows that had taken form. There was no visible propulsion system, no energy readings, no communication signals. And yet, they moved with terrifying precision. Every analysis failed. Every sensor returned null readings. This was not technology. This was something else. Then, the final transmission from the front lines played. A shaky, desperate voice crackled over the speakers. The commander of Outpost Zenith, the last stronghold before the core whirls, was sending a distress call. "This is Admiral Heckran of Outpost Zenith. We are under attack. They are in the shadows. They err." A sudden static burst. The feed glitched violently, and the screen turned to grainy, flickering images. The bridge of Outpost Zenith was dark. Officers lay slumped over their consoles, their faces frozen in expressions of silent horror. There were no wounds, no blood, no sign of struggle. They were simply gone. A figure moved in the background. The Senate chamber gasped as a tall, humanoid silhouette stepped into the flickering light. A man. He wore a dark, tattered coat, his face partially obscured by shadow. His eyes, however, glowed with an unnatural silver light. In his gloved hand, he held a galactic officer's insignia, one that belonged to the very admiral who had sent the distress call moments ago. He raised it toward the camera. And then, in perfect galactic standard, he spoke. "You took everything from us." His voice was calm, measured, cold. "You called us weak." The screen glitched again. Flashes of past atrocities, of burning human cities, of Earth reduced to ruin under the Senate's command. The man's voice darkened. "You thought we were gone." A loud clanking sound echoed through the Senate chamber. The senators jumped as the chamber doors sealed shut. The lights dimmed, and the holographic projection shifted once more. The dark fleet had arrived. The ships were no longer distant specters in space. They were here, orbiting the Senate's homeworld. Vyrex's breath caught in his throat. "Deploy the planetary defenses. We must." "No." General Threx's voice was hollow. He understood. It was too late. The Senate had seen many wars, many battles, many rebellions. But this was not a war. This was a reckoning. The holographic figure of the human stepped closer to the screen. His silver eyes pierced through the room, staring directly at every senator, every warlord, every ruler who had once mocked humanity's weakness. "You wanted to erase us." His voice turned into a whisper. "Now it's our turn." And then, the transmission cut to black.